How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. I now have the complete collection of character minis from my Wild Imaginary West RPG. This here is the Prospector, sculpted by Kaue Costa, based off of the beautiful artwork done by Hardy Fowler. Today I'm going to be making a compact diorama that fits inside this acrylic display box and practicing a painting style called OSL. But before we get there, we have to CTSF with our HWT. I set the width of the first cut using the box as the reference because everything needs to fit inside the box eventually. I then started slicing the foam into workable sheets, changing the size of the cuts as I needed. There are some types of foam that you can cut nice straight lines in using a hobby blade, but when it comes to styrofoam, I have found that there's really nothing like a hot wire. After I had my slices, I put the table away and it was time to start gluing the foam together. I used foam safe superglue, but hot glue or PVA glue would have worked as well. I like using foam safe superglue because it's discreet and it tends to be more universal than the other glues, meaning it's safe to glue almost anything together without melting it. The only downside is the cost. And I suppose the toxic fumes of the accelerator. Once my foam frame was assembled, I cut up this wall section of balsa wood for the shoring of the mine. Before deciding whether it looked good or not, I glued it in place, using some foam safe superglue. And it looked terrible, so I ripped that off and began constructing a new wall from scratch. Having different sized planks running horizontally rather than vertically made it look more like the wall of a mine and less like a wood-paneled wall from a basement in the 70s. Before finishing the wall, I needed to give the foam some rocky texture, so I threw on my mask, which I apparently have forgotten how to do. What in the world? Oh, there it is. Once I had that figured out, it was time to grind away at the wall using my Dremel. After chipping away at the wall, I vacuumed up the debris and got rid of the foam ball texture by carefully using a butane torch. If I'm being honest, in real time, the last couple minutes of crafting felt like an absolute clown show, but I got back into my serious crafting mindset and kept on building the wall. I gave the wooden beams some weathering and chipping using my hobby knife, and then I built the upper support of the tunnel, and I'll give some explanation why the tunnel kind of looks like it's destroyed a little later in the video. With the construction of the mine done, it was time to grab a mixing cup. But not that one. I mixed some plaster of Paris with the last of Sam and Frodo's water supply, and then I plastered the cave wall, which gives it some nice protection, as well as a more realistic rocky texture that will hold paint better than the foam by itself. I gave a coat of this to the outside of the diorama as well to make it nice and smooth. Then I mixed up a pinch of Sculptamold. Because I'm integrating the Prospector right into the diorama itself, I needed to have him glued down before the next step. Once he had been glued in place, using some, you guessed it, foam safe superglue, I blended him and his base into the environment using my nice clumpy Sculptamold. With all the terrain pastes in place, I used some isopropyl alcohol to blend things together where it was needed, and then I cleaned up my workstation. It may be considered cheating by some painters, but I'm going to be using a real light source in conjunction with the OSL paint job. So I punched a hole through the back for a styrene tube, which will get wires to the front. I trimmed that flush, and then I added a fake wire, which will look like it gets electricity to the light source. The next step was to add some rock, rubble, and debris, starting with the big stuff and working my way all the way down to the sand. It can actually be surprisingly difficult to create realistic rubble, but a good rule is to put all the big stuff down and then fill everything in with smaller and smaller pieces. I teased the rocks around till I was happy with how they sat, and then I finished the rest of the floor with some texture paint from Citadel. I left that to dry overnight, and then it was time to prime. And so as not to risk any of the foam melting, I decided to prime the whole thing using an airbrush and an acrylic primer. After the primer, it was time to paint the OSL, which means object source lighting, which means that I'm going to attempt to fake light sources using the paint job, rather than rely on real light sources. But like I did mention, I do have a real light in this. However, it shines at the camera and casts almost no light on the diorama itself, so I do consider this to be a real OSL paint job. But you are welcome to sharply disagree in the comments if you'd like. Either way, while I paint this, I'd like to give a little bit of backstory for the diorama, as well as give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. Throughout the world of the wild imaginary West, there are many, many mines and tunnels, many of them forgotten. Just like in the real Wild West, collapses and cave-ins can occur at any moment. Needless to say, mining is not a safe occupation. Our prospector here has been searching collapsed mines and tunnels in search of a lost cavity containing glowing green gems. Tales of the brilliant green glow, known as the cielos verdes, have become widely believed to be pure legend, but this man has never lost hope from the first day he heard of it as a boy. The prospector, being an expert in demolitions, uses his well-placed mines and remote detonator to great effect, clearing both rocks and monsters with the persuasive force of his homemade TNT. He has searched the dead ends of every cave and tunnel that he can find in hopes of one day discovering that unmistakable green glow. I apologize if you were looking for an OSL tutorial. There are countless painters who are more qualified to teach you how to do that on YouTube. Just search OSL on YouTube and you should be good to go. The next step was to create a lamp, which I made from styrene tube and some clear heat shrink. I forgot how I made the lamp though, so while I was insulating one of the wires that I had soldered to my LED, I applied some heat, which caused a shrink. Oh, that's right. After creating a new lamp and insulating the wires a little more carefully this time, I threaded that through the back of the diorama and I soldered everything up to an electric tea light candle. Now that I had a real light, it was time to add some real dark, which is black 4.0, of course. Once the sides of the diorama had been cleaned up using the black 4.0, I threw the whole thing inside the acrylic display box, and after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.